All right, we talked last week about Hinduism. Who was the founder of Hinduism? No founder, kind of a conglomeration or combination of multiple philosophies, belief systems in India. Who coined the term Hindu? Yep, in fact, it was the Muslim rulers. And to whom were they referring when they used the term Hindu? You remember? It was those who were non-Muslims. So they referred to Hindus as Hindu. In fact, the term Hindu in India, they're related. They're just kind of different translations of the same term, but they were referring to non-Muslim people. Number 3, who are the Aryans and how did they help define Hinduism? So first of all, who were they? Invaders who invaded around 1500 BC they conquered India. And how did they help define Hinduism?
They kind of gave the foundations of it.
Okay, so the Aryan religion kind of provided the foundation, some of the main components and philosophies of what has become Hinduism were provided by that group. Question 5, what is Om and what does it mean? It's a sound, okay? It's more like an onomatopoeia. And what does it represent?
Prosperity, fortune.
Not this one.
Not this one.
No, you're thinking of the swastika.
Oh, okay.
Okay, the totality of the universe. All right, it's supposed to kind of represent that spiritual form of the universe, that which is emanating from their supreme gods and so forth. It's that kind of non-real, ethereal energy is kind of what that represents. Name the 4 Vedic texts. Or try to. The Rig, the Sama, the Yajur, or the Atharva, and the Atharva. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing those properly, but those are the 4 that are referenced. Number 7, who are the following? Who is Varuna? Okay, a god, and what was he the god of? Order, cosmic order, okay. And again, these are very broad strokes. There's obviously more specifics when you start getting into some of these. What about Indra? Okay, and to who he was also the one for whom the largest number of hymns were dedicated in the Vedas. Agni. Okay, he's associated with fire, the god of fire. He's associated with the sacrifices that were offered through fire. What about Brahman? First of all, who was Brahma? Brahma is supposed to be their supreme god, the one who kind of birthed the dream that is the universe and reality. Therefore, the Brahmin were who? They were an order of priests who sought to serve Brahma. And what did they establish themselves as? Kind of the leaders, the governors of the people. They set themselves as the highest caste, and everybody else was kind of under them, so they kind of took over in terms of the religion of India, or of Hinduism. All right, number 8, describe the worship of a Hindu. First of all, is there anything specific? Anything commanded? Okay. So there's nothing specific or commanded. Different Hindus, and it may vary based on region. It may vary between even families. But generally speaking, there's a sense of meditation. Either, again, the idea of Om and the idea of powerful objects are kind of a key component. In fact, they'll have their own temples. They'll have their own shrines in their homes sometimes. And certain objects that are associated either with, we talked about river and different things that have certain powers. There's kind of a connection to Buddhism with that regard. But the idea of having that connection in some form or fashion to the emanation of Brahma is kind of the idea behind that. But there's really mainly only the meditation, and associated with that, I guess you could say chanting is kind of associated with that as well. All right, number 9. What do the Hindus believe about Jesus? Okay, so he was either a wise man who had good teachings, moral teachings, or he was a incarnation of one of their gods. Remember, we talked about their gods and how that there are multiple incarnations, and it gets very confusing when you start going through Vishnu and Krishna and Shiva and all these, because some of them are actual gods and some of them are just the physical incarnations of them. And some will suggest that Jesus may have been an incarnation of one of their gods. What do they believe about man, and for that matter, the universe? Okay, endless. There's an endless cycle of reincarnation. The universe doesn't end. It's cyclical. Okay, is it real? Okay, it's not real. Again, it's more like a daydream from Brahma, and we are just an extension of that daydream. But they do believe in continual reincarnation. What about salvation? Okay, so as far as salvation goes, they don't really believe that there's anything from which to be saved. However, they do encourage certain avenues, if you want, to try to focus or hone in on certain pathways through the spiritual observation of yoga. And some of those different pathways are focused on different things, whether it's personal improvement and that sort of thing. So salvation is not really a definable term in terms of Hinduism. Question 10, what are the 4 goals or aims of life for a Hindu? They're kind of defined by the terms dharma, kama, artha, and moksha in our lesson. And all of those components are found, that's on page 46. Dharma one is expected to understand the meaning of duty and righteousness. Kama, which is the knowledge of love. Artha, the pursuit of wealth and power. And then moksha, which is liberation from the bondage of worldly existence. It's self-realization that I've been reincarnated a billion times before, and then I'm going to be reincarnated again. What about the 4 social classes? Got the Brahmins, they're at the top. The whatever that word is, I think the K is silent. The Kshatriyas, which is kind of the military class. What else? The Vaisyas, they're farmers, business people, and then the 4th one, Sudra, they're the untouchables. Okay, they're the peasants, a lot of the menial tasks and so forth. Name the 4 states of life. Student, householder, forest dweller, and renouncer. So it's supposed to represent kind of this evolution in life. You start off learning, you kind of have this period of time when you're in your home and you're married. Then as a forest dweller, as a grandparent, you no longer are taking care of a home. And so the idea is now you're gaining wisdom. And then finally renouncer, this is the highest level, I guess you could say, where you renounce all things of life. And now you're given entirely to the spiritual realization or self-realization of reality. Number 13, what signs might you see on the forehead or the bridge of the nose? Okay, red dot on the forehead, a certain type of ring through the nose. Okay, now keep in mind, not all of these are always going to be spiritual observations. Some of them are cultural. Okay, so some people may not necessarily have the spiritual awareness of what these things represent in terms of the spiritual Hinduism observation. Some of them do it because it's cultural. Now, we've noted that before with a lot of these other religions as well, that a lot of these things are kind of cross-cultural. They're not necessarily just religious observation or just cultural. They can kind of go back and forth. Number 14, why is it wrong for a Hindu to eat beef? Cow is sacred. Okay, and remember, we talked a little bit about, in fact, even there's a little bit of crossover there as well with Buddhism, but especially, or with Buddhism, but Hinduism especially, the cow is sacred. All life is sacred to that point. And to a certain extent, remember Buddhism, the difference with reincarnation of Buddhism is that the individuality of reincarnation doesn't pass from one life to the next. It's just that energy. Whereas Hinduism, are you supposedly aware of what you are every time you are reincarnated? Okay, you're supposed to be. And sometimes, because of karma, you might be incarnated as a human, but then the next time, if you're a bad human, what might you be incarnated as? A snake, a bug, okay? But then sometimes you might also be a cow, if you were really, really good maybe, or something like that. So this is, we talked a little bit last week about kind of the basis of the statement, he wouldn't hurt a fly. And for those who are kind of peak Hindu, they view all life as sacred, even the lives of insects, because that could be an ancestor as far as they're concerned, that life essence that could be in them. All right. How are karma and sin alike, and how are they different? Huh?
Page 49.
Yeah, page 49, there's a whole chart there listing the differences between karma and sin. But the sense of karma, Paul says in Galatians that we will reap what we sow. All right? And that's basically you can almost make that the mantra of karma. You will reap what you sow. The difference is that what does the Bible teach? When will that happen? We'll reap what we sow. At Judgment Day. Okay? But as far as karma is concerned with Hinduism, how will what you reap you'll sow, how is that then shown? By reincarnation. By what level of being you might be in reincarnation. So there's some similarity there in the sense of overarching justice. But again, in terms of how that's realized and how that's considered, and even how that's defined, what's right and wrong, what do you consider a good versus bad human, that is very susceptible to, or very subjective. It's susceptible to regions and different families and so forth. There's no set rule on what they view as right and wrong, other than life is sacred. And then finally, number 16, gives some suggestions on how to approach a Hindu for a Bible study. There's a whole list of things that we could go through. Now, Rick focuses on Jesus. That's on the final page, page 50. Focus on Jesus and the nature of Jesus, especially given the fact that Hindus at least acknowledge that he was a good man. Well, what's the basis for that? How do you define that? What did he say that made him good? So maybe focus on some of those components, and especially if, for instance, they're one of the ones who believe that he was an incarnation of one of their gods, does that therefore make what Jesus says binding? When Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments, does that mean that those Hindus who acknowledge Jesus as being an incarnation of one of their gods, do they view his commandments as something they should follow? And if not, why not? So that would probably be one of those ways. But I mean, there's multiple things in here that you could talk about. Whether it's the nature of the universe, talk about the idea of justice as having a finality. Okay, the idea of reincarnation, there's no finality. You just continue on and on and on and on. Whereas God promises there will be a day, a final day, when everything will come to judgment. Everyone will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Everyone will give an account, and that'll be it. There won't be, 10,000 years later, a new incarnation for us to try again. Okay, it'll be done. And so there's a sense of final justice that we can really emphasize and help people to understand. All right, anything through those questions?
The belief system is real convenient to dismiss Christianity.
Yeah, it is, and there's a lot of course, and that's true for a lot of these religions as well, but, the idea of Hinduism, it's not to say that there aren't incompatible components. I mean, the idea of being a good person is emphasized. We believe being a godly person is what the Bible emphasizes. Godly and good are not the same thing. In fact, Paul even points that out in Romans chapter 5. For a righteous man, someone would dare to die. For a good man, someone might die. So there's a difference between righteous and good. But while we were still sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. But yeah, there's a lot of it that's very convenient to kind of avoid some of the truths regarding a final judgment day in particular. Yeah. Anything else? All right, so before I forget, we're going to go ahead and start chapter 7, or lesson 7, the New Age movement. But before I forget, lessons 8 and 9, we're going to cover both of those next week. Lessons 8 and 9 are shorter chapters, both of which are very specific, or at least one of them is very specific. It's about the UUA, the Universal something Association, I forget what the other U was, and then secular religion, and kind of focuses on things like communism and Marxism, things like that. And so, but those lessons are shorter. They're about basically the same size as one of these single lessons. So we're going to cover both of those lessons next week, and both pages for questions are on the table, both lesson 8 and 9. So before I forget, that's what I wanted to cover. All right, so the New Age movement. If you're not familiar with the specific phrase, you will be familiar with a lot of the emphases or some of the points or elements of the New Age movement. He mentions at the very beginning, he talks about school children and being taught to kind of meditate and kind of focus on their own power and things like that. He quotes from Dr. Beverly Galligan, who came up with this phrase, confluent education, the idea of teaching children to kind of find their inner power, their inner strength and spirit. And we're not talking like, okay, find your determination and find your good qualities. This is more of a metaphysical type of thing. It's a idea of feeling like you have some sort of power yourself. But basically, in a broad sense, the way, as Rick defines the New Age movement, he says it's a network of otherwise dissimilar people that are focused on replacing the reality of a personal God, okay, Jehovah, with the idea that humanity is the center of all things. And in a lot of ways, they have borrowed, this New Age movement, they've kind of borrowed a whole bunch of different ideas and philosophies from multiple different places. But the humanist movement itself is not necessarily the same thing as the New Age movement. When you read that, the idea that humanity is the center of all things, the first thing that came to my mind was the humanist movement, the Humanist Manifesto. But keep in mind, the humanist movement does not believe in a spirit. They don't believe in a spiritual, ethereal type of power or anything like that. All they believe is flesh and blood. They believe that natural laws govern all things. And so there's not really that sense. There is a similarity in that they both believe humanity is the center of the universe, that humanity is the biggest thing that there is, but in different ways. The humanist movement focuses on flesh and blood, physical, whereas the New Age movement focuses more on mysticism, more on the emotional and feelings of connections to a broad, overarching power, not a God specifically. It also points out some of the symbols, and I've seen these symbols before, and so I'm sure some of you have, on bumper stickers and things like that. And if you didn't know what these symbols represent, you might think, okay, coexist. I have no problem with coexisting. I'm all in favor of coexisting. In fact, Paul encourages us with Romans chapter 12 to live peaceably with, as much as depends on us, to live peaceably with all men. Wouldn't that suggest coexisting with other people? Sure, but is that what this symbol means, or this sign, or the way it's presented?
It's like that phrase, I'm okay, you're okay.
I'm okay, you're okay. Yeah.
Based on all those symbols.
Right.
Every religion is fine.
And that's really what this is about. Okay, the idea of coexisting is one religion for all, and no matter how you go about touching that religion or contacting that power, it ultimately kind of all fills within this same single structure. The church within a symbol, which is this interlooping one, that's the idea that God is inside of us. The divine is inside of us. Not Jehovah is inside of us. Divine nature. It's just the kind of this undefinable quality. And then there's the peace sign, which has kind of been adapted from nuclear disarmament, which that started back in the 60s. The peace sign was kind of the inverse of the nuclear symbol, but they kind of co-opted that to represent peace. And now it's taken on an even broader sense with regard to, it now represents peace between God, any kind of church, and humanity. And so it's kind of all under this single umbrella. And regardless of what specific religion you may follow or adhere to, You can't say that what somebody else believes is wrong, or you can't say that anybody else's philosophies or views are any less important than yours, which everybody believes that their philosophies, their beliefs, those are important to them. But you can't say anything bad about or say that that's not right or anything like that. Thoughts or comments through the signs or symbols? All right. So then he talks a little bit about the history of it. Now, to be clear, and I really appreciate this point from Rick, but he doesn't make it till the end of the lesson. In the very beginning, when Satan tempted Adam and Eve, what was kind of the thing that he said that really prompted Eve to kind of take a new look at the fruit? You will be like God. Okay. Now, it is true in the sense of understanding right from wrong. They did understand that, right? But did they become like God? No. They simply were able to receive a knowledge of right and wrong, good and evil. But they didn't become like God. But that was the lie that Satan told Eve. And then Eve took it the rest of the way. She saw, yeah, the fruit was desirable to make one wise. There's what Satan specifically said. But then it was pleasant to the eyes. It was good for food. And so she took it the rest of the way herself. She and Adam did. And so that lie is not anything new. That you can be God. That you can be like God. You can be a God all your own. Well, this Western iteration of it started in the 60s and the 70s. In fact, the Woodstock was actually billed as an Aquarian exposition. In fact, New Age and the Age of Aquarius. In fact, there's a lot of songs that were sung in the 60s and 70s about the Age of Aquarius. And it's the sense of this age of love, an age of enlightenment, an age of new understanding. And with that came a lot of other components as well that we'll talk about in just a minute. But the basic belief system, and this is part of the reason why Rick put this particular lesson here after we've already talked about Buddhism and Hinduism, both of which are interconnected, not the least of which because they're both from India. But you also have the sense of the connection between the channeling and contacting the spiritual, the divine, that kind of religious feeling that people gain by thinking that they have convinced themselves in some way that they've contacted that they're in touch with that. And so there's a little bit of crossover there. And I think a lot of ways, Hinduism and Buddhism have this, because there is a sense of inner peace that is emphasized in both of those religions, that sense of inner peace is associated with wisdom and enlightenment. And I think the idea of the New Age movement grabbing onto that says that that's very appealing. The idea of feeling at peace and feeling at ease with the world, that's very appealing to a lot of people, having control over outbursts and things like that. And I think they grabbed hold of that because there's some feeling of wisdom associated with that. Then it kind of then relates and it trickles down into a lot of other things. Now, we talk about holistic health. Let me be clear, we're not talking about natural treatments. So sometimes we use the phrase holistic treatments or things like that to refer to natural things. That's not the same thing. When it comes to holistic health, we're talking about focusing on some broader sense of the whole being, not just a person's symptoms, but the person's mind, person's spirit, and in some ways even their social health is a component to that as well. And so when you say holistic, sometimes we might need to be careful who we're talking to. If we talk about I'm using a holistic approach, you might specify I'm using a natural approach to handle this issue or to treat this problem I have, or as this symptom comes up, I take these types of herbs or I take these vitamins or whatever. Just because, and I didn't really think about this before, that for some people, holistic may have a spiritual component to it that would certainly stand in a little bit in contradiction to what Christians believe, especially with regard to the spirit, we are part of, we are God type of thing.
That section almost needs a couple of subcategories.
It does.
Because I actually agree with some of what they're saying.
Absolutely.
Even modern medicine doctors will say, like if you're going through chemotherapy, if your mind isn't...
Absolutely. And there's,
feeling good, you're not gonna get well possibly, or,
Right.
there's a lot about our brains and our bodies we still don't really know.
sure.
So alternative medicine is not bad.
No, alternative, and that might be another way to put that, alternative medicine. And that's not the same as having the spiritual connotations as holistic might have. And so, but I agree with you. Kind of some sub points to that would kind of help to make it clear that we're not talking about natural remedies, we're not talking about alternative methods of treatment, we're talking about the overview itself. Now that's not to say that, our mind can't affect our body. Our minds are incredibly powerful things, and God has created us that way. And, we, in fact, just looking at studies of the effectiveness of I had it in my head and it left me. Medicine, but it's not really placebo, of the placebo effect. Okay, how powerful that belief that I did receive something that could help me can be on the body. We know that there's a connection there. That's not contrary to God's word, and it's not contrary in the sense of believing in holistic health. But making that distinction between this kind of observation of the universe inside me, and kind of treating God within me and treating it in the sense of the way they view that's very different than saying alternative treatments or natural remedies and things like that. Any other thoughts through that? All right. So then he goes on, he talks a little bit about psychology and how that the New Age movement has kind of filtered into psychology, and it focuses on human potential. Now, I want to emphasize here again that the humanist movement also focuses on human potential, but the humanist movement focuses on the physical potential of humanity, whereas the New Age movement focuses on more so the metaphysical potential of humanity. The loving nature that humanity can achieve, the oneness of humanity that we can have, and kind of that letting that divine within us spread to others. That type of emphasis is what's being referred to. Regarding ethics, there really are no ethics in the sense that there's any right or wrong that is defined. As far as they're concerned, there's really no good or evil. It's all relative. When you start, and in fact, I think Rick in the lesson even refers to some quotes by different members of this New Age movement that kind of push these ideas, but that any individual claiming that this is absolutely right or this is absolutely wrong, they have no basis to say that. All morality is subjective and relative to each culture, to each era of time that people are in, and so forth. Having said that, however, we have dealt with in lessons past, not just in this book, but in others, issues of saying that ethics can be personal. They don't have to be absolute. The idea, we've talked a little bit about situational ethics or situation ethics. That based on the situation, right and wrong may not be as definable, and you maybe can't, maybe you can move the goalposts a little bit based on what situation you're facing. Whereas does God's word in any way suggest that that's something that God approves? No. Okay, what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. Now, that doesn't mean man always acknowledges that, but as far as God is concerned, is right always right? Yes. Okay, it doesn't change based upon, well, this one scenario, I'll let it slide. Okay, if any one scenario would be an example, and there's multiples that we could choose from, but Uzzah might be a great example. All he tried to do is to keep the ark from falling off the cart. Now, to be clear, the scripture doesn't actually say that the ark was going to fall off the cart. It just says they went over a rough patch. He put his arm out, perhaps even instinctively, to keep the ark from falling or from tumbling. But what happened to him? God killed him, because what was the law? You were not to touch the ark, even if you thought you were trying to help. Okay, Uzzah had no ill intent. It wasn't malicious, and yet he was still guilty of breaking the law, regardless of his intent. And I think that's a great example of showing there's no situational ethics with God. All right. Then it talks about reincarnation and karma. Again, borrowing from Buddhism, borrowing from Hinduism. They believe in this thing called non-judgmental justice. And to them, that's where karma comes in. That karma ultimately will equalize everything. Okay, karma, whether it's necessarily in reincarnation or even in this life, they think events that happen in this life will kind of equalize everything out. So if you've become rich in this life, regardless of whether you earned it or not, somehow or another, that life is going to make sure you end up paying for that wealth beyond what other people have in some form or fashion. It may not be that later you're going to be poor, but that somehow in life you're going to end up paying in other ways. Maybe hardship, or maybe a sickness in your family, something like that. But they also believe that it will equalize in the next life. That in this life, if you're rich, next life you may be poor. Okay, to kind of equalize it all out. As if there was some overarching determiner of justice. And I think that's really interesting. They don't believe in a deity. Okay, New Age movement, in fact, it's very specific. They don't believe in deity. They're trying to get away from deity as much as they can. It's that we're all deity. And so somehow it's almost as like there's some kind of natural equalizer. Kind of like how water, what is one of the most basic fundamental properties of water? Can you turn it? Can you turn it upside down and stay? No matter what container you put it in, what will it always do? Because of gravity, you'll find the most common denominator and equalize, okay, no matter where you are. And that idea is kind of composed within this New Age movement of thinking regarding karma. That somehow, that right and wrong will somehow, like water, equalize. But again, where's that determining factor? If this is some sort of even a natural, albeit spiritual thing, who's made those rules? Who's made those laws that cause each thing to equal out? And I find it very interesting that there's no explanation of that. That's beyond our ability to understand. Okay, but yet supposedly I'm God, you know, or at least I can have that contact with the ethereal and the divine. So how is it that's not explainable? Yes, ma'am.
Well, it sounds like they think it's all going to equal out.
Yeah.
It's all going to, like you said, go to balance out. But the reality is there's nothing in nature, nothing other than maybe water or other liquid, that will automatically balance. I mean, if you have a mudslide somewhere, you know, nothing balances that out, you know. And as far as, I mean, if they want to say there's no deity, but we're made in the image of deity, so we're made in the image of deity. So I can't believe they don't want deity. They think deity is just nature, I guess.
Right. There's this kind of broader power, this broader energy that is connecting everything. And one of the reasons why they want to avoid the idea of deity is if there is deity, then that suggests a power greater than man. But what do they not believe? They don't believe there's anything greater than man. Okay, man is it. We're the pinnacle of creation, or of existence. And so there is nothing greater than man. And if there is a deity, that suggests that that deity has authority to dictate right and wrong. If they're somehow greater than we are, if there's even a single being out there that's greater than we are, then they have authority in the sense that they can determine right and wrong. And that would completely eliminate the entire basis of what they believe, that there is no right and wrong. It's all relative. And of course they're right, especially one who has created us. Does he ultimately have the right to determine what's right and wrong? If he's the one who created us, then he can tell us what he wants to have happen, what's right and what's wrong. All right, so it goes on to talk about how a lot of these things have trickled down into politics as well. And not to say necessarily that all efforts at globalism go back to the New Age movement, because there's been efforts of globalism even predating and one world government predating the Western version of the New Age movement. In fact, there were a lot of people back in the 40s and the 50s who were convinced that the UN was an effort for a one world government. There's been a lot of thoughts about that for a long time. But they emphasize this not necessarily for the purpose of political unity, but more so for control. That's really what it's about. They believe that a one world government and globalism on that type of scale would enable them to put forward and enable this government to put forward, this is how we all need to view each other. And anyone who even makes a claim that what somebody else believes isn't right, then you're in trouble, because that's not how we as a government of the world are to view each other. Okay, and to regulate that ability to factor out these maybe even governments that are based on religions that they deem to be inappropriate or oppressive even. Okay, and in some ways you could see maybe some of the benefits that you might have from some of that, but on the flip side of that, does God allow man free will? He allows us to make a choice. Now, will there be repercussions or consequences for those choices? Yes, but he still allows us the right to choose. And so there is a sense in which, even though I might wish there's certain oppressive governments in Asia or in Africa that wouldn't be as oppressive as they are, whether it's towards Catholicism or towards Buddhism or towards Christianity, the fact is those governments exist. That doesn't mean I approve of it, but it also doesn't mean that we should have one world government stamping it out every time it pops up. Okay? But they focus on ecological conservation. Now, if I believe in ecological conservation in of itself, does that mean I'm a New Age movement a follower? No. Okay, and there are certain ways that many people can be ecological conservationists and believe in being able to take care of the environment and not necessarily fall into the rest of this. Okay, so understand that these are broad things that they emphasize that are not necessarily indicative of any one individual thing that somebody might follow or say, I believe that should be a good thing. For instance, nuclear disarmament. Whether you believe that nuclear deterrent is a great thing, or we would all prefer to have no governments with nuclear weapons, either way, whichever way you follow on that, that's fine. Okay? Does God say it's wrong to have nuclear weapons? Does God say you need to disband all nuclear weapons? No. Okay? There's no political or governmental guidance that God says is right or wrong. So however you follow on that, that's your prerogative. But it's within this format that it takes on a new component. Relieving overpopulation and starvation, dealing with resource depletion, removal of gender, and the redistribution of wealth. All of this speaks to that idea of karma. It speaks to the equalization of all things in the world. And if you look at each one of these things, each one of them focuses on that component. It's this spiritual equilibrium that they're trying to achieve, that they're trying to emphasize. And that's part of the motivation that they have for this. Talk about education, removal of Christian references in favor of New Age ideas, things like encouraging rebellion, things like centering and channeling the inner self, the references to global citizens. We're all citizens on Earth, and don't worry about these man-made boundaries and borders and things like that. Those are all focuses. He says it boils down to two main components of individuals here. You've got the occult, and they observe things like reincarnation, the power of crystals, channeling. There's references to individuals with a pyramid, and they stick the pyramid on their head, and they think somehow that provides some kind of special power. UFOs, but not in the sense that people are fascinated by the phenomenon, but the idea of somehow there's some kind of connection to the divine there, or to the universe. Worship of self or self-exaltation is associated with that. Then you have the humanistic element. And again, that's where you talked about the development of the human potential, ethics that are focused on yourself and not binding those ethics to anybody else. And then we also talked about, Rick talks about the beliefs in God. There's monism and pantheism. Monism is the belief that I am God. Okay, God is a force, it's an energy, and it's beyond good or evil. And this is within me, it's within all things, and there needs to be that balance that exists. In fact, this quote just kind of threw me for, well, it didn't throw me for a loop, but it just kind of really shocked me. He quoted one of these New Age philosophers, and he says, "It is time God be put in his place, that is, in man, and no nonsense about it." And so to think that God, Jehovah, the Creator, to look at God as what he presents himself in the Bible, that's nonsense, okay? He needs to be put in his place. There is no God. We are all divine in that sense. Describe some of the goals, which is the perfection of ability to love. That's not necessarily, although certainly would include the kind of the slogan or the phrase, love is love. The ability to love all people and no matter their gender, that would certainly be a part of that. But loving all mankind, there was a song back in was it the early 70s? And I don't remember the name of it, but it refers to people of the world hop on the love train. And when I read that, Rick said, that's the first thing that popped in my head was that song. I think it's from the late 70s or late 60s, early 70s. And then karma being a central component to that. Reincarnation, life correcting itself, and so forth. All right, anything else for that? All right, very quickly. So Rick says in trying to speak to somebody who is caught up in this type of thought process and thinking, he says, acknowledge that search for spirituality, okay? Because some of these people are very sincere and they really do think that this is the best way to go. All right, well, let's talk about spirituality. Let's talk about the pursuit of that and how to contact, quote unquote, or being in connection with the divine. He describes kind of going through the weakness of humanity versus the strength that we have in Christ. And how that even if everyone in the world were to do what the goal of this New Age movement is, do you really think that this world would be full of peace, with no wars, no conflict, and no nothing? No, it would never happen. Not happen. It's just not human nature. Okay, eventually greed, desire, one's own pursuits, those are going to get in the way of anything like that. And it's just not going to work the way you think it might. Inner peace, while certainly a laudable goal, and Buddhism, Hinduism, that's all about inner peace. But the Bible teaches us that that inner peace is achieved through Jesus, that peace that passes all understanding. But we do believe that we'll reap what we sow. But there will be a day, however, in which not subjective ethics will judge the day, but a standard of right and wrong that will not change will judge on that day, and that's Jesus on that throne. Talk about the definition of sin. The definition of God is one of the things he mentions, defining perfection and showing how we come to perfection in the spirit, that in the flesh, nothing's ever going to be perfect. We come to that through Jesus. All right. We'll stop there. We've only got a slide left, so we'll pick that up next Sunday. But like I said, our goal next Sunday will be to do our questions for Lesson 7, cover Lesson 8 and Lesson 9 for both the UUA and the secular religions. Thank you, everybody.